Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me in this live stream today. I hope you're having a really nice Sunday, really peaceful. So for those of you who are here for the first time, just a quick reminder that you are welcome to use a chat feature. I'm doing my best always to read all your messages. You can, ask questions if you like. And I do recommend, if you do have a question, I do recommend to kind of stick to the subject and also kind of use my name so that so I can simply see your message basically, or you can use the super chat feature. So hi Kevin, nice to see you here. So over the past live streams, I've been doing lots of subjects on kind of self-exploration or knowing yourself better, knowing your maybe true self or authentic self and working towards that direction. Today, I wanted to kind of shift the direction a little bit towards more, maybe more practicalities, more movement, more dynamic things that you can start doing in your life that could bring change, transformation to yourself, to your life in general. So my first question towards you, as I asked in a chat box before as well, would be what sort of things would you like to change about yourself or in your life in general? Because I assume that if you are here, there is something that you might want to change. So feel free to use a chat and share with me and other people what sort of things would you like to change about yourself or in your life in general. So I would imagine on maybe from a broader perspective, change could be something about maybe changing our habits or the way we think, the way we behave around people, maybe changing our relationships, changing our careers, our job, our hobbies. So there are many different things that we could change, either about ourselves or our life. And usually changing ourselves will promote that change in our life. So the thing is that, at least that's my experience, and I'm pretty sure most people actually have similar experiences too, is that change is actually pretty hard. And it's not hard because we are not putting enough work, or we are not disciplined enough, or we are not putting enough willpower. But there are deeper mechanisms to change that most people are not really working with, right? Usually when you read about, for example, changing habits or starting new habits and stuff like that, people are just going to give you few steps to start doing, like, just start waking up earlier or start going to bed earlier, stuff like that. Just stop eating junk food, right? So all these little tips can be very helpful. And yes, of course, you can start implementing them. And for sure, you will notice short-term positive results. But the problem is that this approach will not really promote long-lasting change. So even if you do notice positive results short-term, most likely after a while, it could be after a few weeks, after a few months, after a few years, you're going to probably fall back into old habits unless you put more and more effort into sustaining maybe a new habit or new approach to life. So one of the messages I'm getting here about what sort of things you would like to change is the Burning Marl says, not allowing myself to get distracted by self-indulgent hobbies. So that's a really pretty impactful thing that you can start doing, probably, because it's going to start impacting different things, different areas in your life. So why is that change difficult? Why people, a very good example here is the New Year's resolutions. Why do people set up all these ambitious plans for themselves, all these ambitious goals, but they don't fail? There is a reason, for example, why there is, for example, gym membership, especially the maybe annual ones, because they make fortunes. People start, especially on the beginning of the year, but then just quit. So why is change difficult? There are some theories in psychology about change itself and how we can change. But I think understanding ourselves from this bigger picture can be very helpful. So as you probably can imagine, we are not just composed of this conscious mind or conscious ego or the willpower that we operate normally through, but we are this really complex organisms that contain all these micro and very complex processes inside ourselves. So we are a little bit more than our consciousness, or a little bit more than our conscious ego. There's constantly something going on in the background, on maybe of our heads in general, or in our whole organism, because we are not just the mind, we are not just psychology, but we have our physical bodies, and our conscious mind, our conscious attention is just a little tiny little droplet in this whole ocean of complex processes that we're not fully understanding probably. So when we form a new habit, when we make decisions in our life, when we arrange our lives in a particular way, we might have a very clear and conscious reason of why we are doing it, right? Maybe we want to have better life. Maybe we want to be happier or healthier, right? So usually we reason our goals. We have very reasonable or logical explanations for why we want to do something, why we make this kind of decisions, why our life is the way it is. However, what about these unhealthy habits? Like why we spend so much time on social media, for example, why we pick up things that are really bad for us, like, I don't know, smoking or drinking alcohol or drugs even. Why do we stay distracted? Why do we keep choosing things that are not very good for us on this rational level? And the reason, you could come up probably with many different reasons for why we're doing that. Like, of course, addictions, or we find it comforting, or maybe we struggle with stress and we're looking for this ways to relax. So all sorts of things. But fundamentally, there is always a reason why we're doing it. So it's not completely aimless behavior or aimless addiction, but usually there's something underneath that we are gaining from that behavior, even though it might be in conflict with something more rational, something better for ourselves. And I think fundamentally what might be driving our choices and decisions on this more unconscious level, or rather why we're maintaining this habits, for example, is because we are coping with something. It's like a coping mechanism. It's probably not a new theory, obviously. That some people rationalize, like, drinking or playing video games because it helps them to cope with stress. But fundamentally, it's kind of coping with anxiety, maybe existential anxiety of being overwhelmed, maybe of being alone, maybe about not knowing what to do, maybe feeling lost a little bit. But essentially, it's probably some form of anxiety that we are coping with. So if you kind of take a snapshot of your life and all the different habits and all the different things that you are doing, or even the way you are and the way you relate to people, the way you interact with people, the way you handle your emotions, for example, the way your personality is composed. It's a very rational system of carefully arranged things that help you to manage stress, anxiety, help you to maybe feel a little bit more in control of your life, even though the end result might not always be like you're in control. But generally, there are benefits to all these different things. So what happens is that very often when we introduce a new habit, it's going to be in conflict with this whole complex system of things that we already have arranged in our lives. So, for example, we want to start exercising regularly, but we also have a goal of not exercising underneath in our unconscious that helps us to maybe stay comfortable, because the moment you start moving, maybe you're going to start experiencing more and more feelings. Maybe you're going to start being more connected to yourself. So when we introduce that new habit and we use our willpower to start engaging in that maybe new routine, we are kind of producing a conflict with that underlying commitment to something else that we are having. So that would be a kind of general theory. So change is hard because we are having all these habits and all these things in place basically that help us to feel in a particular way, to help us to maybe not experience anxiety. So how do we access basically unconscious? What is the unconscious? And there are many perspectives on the unconscious in a general sense, not just the mind, because the unconscious also includes the whole organism. So how your body is working, what sort of things, what sort of reflexes do you have, and how maybe kind of capable, how skillful you are in using these reflexes. And of course, as I'm saying, there are many different theories on this whole realm of unconscious. And if you've been kind of around my channel for a while, as you can imagine, I really like the perspective from Jungian psychology, Carl Jung's perspective on this whole realm of different layers to our mind, to our psyche, where we can go kind of deeper and deeper. But as psychology evolved over the years, of course, these theories, this kind of ancient theories on the unconscious evolved. So we are not using in modern psychology as much of these Jungian theories or psychoanalytical theories, as much valuable they are. But maybe we are more focused on this cognitive stuff. Regardless, I still think that like symbolism or archetypes or imaginary is very helpful in understanding what is happening on this unconscious level, because the unconscious mind, look, just to kind of focus on the mind itself, is of course it's highly irrational. And a good example of that is when we take a look at our dreams. They're completely absurd, and sometimes maybe they don't make sense. But generally, like, dreams give us a kind of snapshot on the workings of the unconscious and what sort of atmosphere there is inside our mind. So we could use all this symbolism to start explaining why we're having certain habits, why we're making certain decisions, and then we are like, I don't know why I've done that. For example, I don't know what have come onto me. So we could use this more symbolical language to help us understand. And one of the perspectives we could use is that we have many different parts of ourselves, independent parts that are kind of making decisions for us at times. Different parts of us that are maintaining habits or the way we are. So at times, personality A is going to come out a little bit and influence your decisions. Then at different times, a personality B is going to influence how you behave and what sort of things you do. So then each of these parts is having different habits, different commitments, most importantly, different commitments, different goals. So this will be kind of one perspective on the unconscious that maybe could help us to understand why it's difficult to make that change. But fundamentally, I think it's understanding that our habits, our current habits in our lives, are dictated by our goals and commitments to certain things. And understanding these commitments is crucial to making change in our lives or embarking on that maybe path of transformation. So it's not about, I mean, it's still valuable, but it's not as much about to devise a plan or an action plan and follow step by step and do this and do this and do that. Of course, that's going to be very valuable, but as I said before, it's going to be probably long-term change. To make real change, we need to understand these commitments. We need to understand the underlying processes that influence our decisions. So I know that can be a little maybe challenging to this idea that we are in control. And I personally, I disagree with this whole idea of being in control. And I don't think that we are in control at all. Maybe just a little bit, but I rather think that there's something we need to cooperate with rather than force it, because forcing things is not going to lead us to this long-lasting change. And also, evidence is contrary to that. That's why people go on the diet and fail. That's why people try to maintain new habits and they fail. Because there's something more to our maybe ego or the conscious mind. And we need to understand that to produce the more long-lasting change. So there is this psychologist called Robert Kagan that I've been really fascinated with. Oh, thank you so much, Hinsuk. Did I pronounce that right? I hope. Nice to meet you. So there's this psychologist I've been kind of following for a while. His name is Robert Kagan. Hopefully I pronounced that right as well. And he called this whole idea of struggling to change as the immunity to change. So what it means is what I've just explained, that underneath our conscious behavior, our conscious commitments and willpower, we have this unconscious commitments to certain things that provide us positive results. So on the one hand, consciously, we might set a goal that we want to, let's say, go on a diet, and we devise a perfect plan. Okay, from tomorrow I'm going to eat this, I'm not going to eat that, I'm not going to eat after a certain time, and so on and so on. But then underneath all that, all these conscious mega plans that we are making for ourselves and these perfect goals, ambitious goals, underneath all that, we are having unaddressed commitments to something else. For example, food might be giving us a lot of comfort. It helps us to cope with stress, or it helps us to not feel anxiety, or it helps us to socialize more. Depending on the culture, for example, eating can be very social things for some people. Let's say you go out with friends and they pick a restaurant and the restaurant is maybe serving only junk food. So the real change is about changing this underlying commitments. And to really understand this underlying commitments, we need to understand this maybe unconscious side of ourselves, the unconscious personalities that are contributing to how we are moving throughout the day and what sort of decisions we are making. So what happens is that when we start setting these ambitious goals for ourselves, that maybe we want to be a different person, maybe we want to have a new habit, maybe we want to change our jobs, not only we kind of create the conflict between our conscious mind, conscious willpower, and the underlying unconscious maybe personalities or commitments, but also we start to spend our energy on trying to force ourselves into this direction that we really want to go. Now, of course, I'm not saying that it's wrong to completely set goals for yourselves, but it's a matter how we set these goals. So not only we create usually probably conflicts within ourselves, because then one side of ourselves wants to stick to old habits, and then the new self, the new conscious self, the willpower, wants to do something else. Then we start to experience these conflicts, but also we start to waste energy. So as you probably know, willpower itself on its own takes a lot of energy. So, when you start a new habit, when you start learning something, it takes a lot of energy to keep moving that direction until you, for example, get to a point where that habit or that new learning becomes unconscious and automatic. So then you don't have to spend as much energy. So with this logic, what happens is that we could just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and make maybe short change, but it will not be long-lasting change, because we still have this underlying conflicting, contradictory commitment. So a very good way to explore it is to look for benefits, for honest benefits of your current habits in your life, or the way you are, or the way your life is arranged. Like, what are you getting from the current structure that you are in? And that needs to be a very honest question. And it might be maybe uncomfortable at times. Maybe it might be a bit shameful, especially when you feel like, you should change, you should be a different person. But try to put it a little bit aside. Try to put this kind of social expectations or the ideal self aside, so that you can explore this underlying mechanisms. But exploring these underlying reasons or causes for why you are the way you are, why you keep doing this habit again and again and again, even if it might not be very good for you, can be a very positive step, can be a very good step towards this more creative, more long-lasting change that you want to have. So then, of course, that logically leads us to that when we want to make a change, we're working with this underlying commitments. But I don't think it's that easy either, because they are a bit in the unconscious realm. So I think the very big aspect, like I've mentioned before, about the reasons for why we maintain certain habits in our lives, or why we are the way we are, is that lots of these things that we do are serving us as a anxiety defense mechanism, so we don't have to experience stress or anxiety or discomfort. So the structure, the way you are right now, the whole structure is doing fantastic job from this perspective, because probably anxiety is kind of at bay. You're feeling quite comfortable with yourself and how things are. So, thank you so much, James. Thank you. So that gives us a clue in terms of what sort of things can we investigate, or we need to pay attention to when we investigate this kind of underlying commitments that we are having. That big thing is anxiety. So what sort of situations make you anxious? In what sort of situations you get that maybe impulse to engage in some habit or do something? Or the opposite to that would be when you set a goal for yourself. Is it going to help you to feel less anxious, or is it going to make you a bit more anxious? So that leads us to this maybe more emotional realm, where we start understanding the consequences, the emotional consequences of our actions. So we do one thing, and it will be good to know why we're doing it and what sort of impact it will have on our emotional life, especially on the anxiety. So to use the same example with let's say exercising. Let's say you want to exercise every morning. Let's use that example. But then what you're doing is you're not exercising at all. So what is the commitment? Why are you not exercising at all? So then you might start thinking and feeling that not exercising actually helps you to avoid anxiety, because if you start exercising, you're going to start connecting with yourself a bit more. You're going to experience more feelings, more discomfort, maybe more self-criticism, maybe more concern about your health. So you're going to start getting more connected with yourself. So not exercising is in place because you are committed to maybe feeling a bit more disconnected from yourself, from the anxiety, from the discomfort. Maybe it's more comfortable, so you are committed to feeling comfortable. Maybe you worry that you're going to miss on other things in your life. So again, you are committed to not missing things on your life. So as you can see here, you can, and that's by the way from the book called Immunity to Change by Robert Keegan. That gives us a very nice structure to work with. So you can write down a list of things in regards to your goal. So how will your goal look like? And then on the middle list, write things that you are currently doing that is in opposition to this goal. And in the last column, write things that are causing you to engage in these behaviors that are contradictory to your goals. So these are these hidden commitments that I recommend working with if you really want to make a long-lasting change. That's the whole point of this live stream, I guess. Hello, Schultze. Nice to see you here. Okay, so I guess the question would be, how do we work with this underlying commitments? How do we change these commitments? And I think that's where the real transformation is, because kind of logically, if you remove these commitments, you're going to start experiencing maybe anxiety, confusion, uncertainty, ambivalence. It's not going to be comfortable because you don't have this other defense mechanisms in place. You don't have these other coping strategies in place that could help you to cope with maybe uncertainty or anxiety. So to work with this underlying commitments, to work with this underlying maybe reasons, the real things that need changing can be a little bit uncomfortable and might seem risky and might seem difficult at first, because then what do you do instead? So knowing what you can expect, knowing that you need to replace these commitments with something else can be very helpful, because you know that, okay, so you start changing the commitments, you start getting committed to something else, something contradictory. Can be anxiety provoking and might be a little bit maybe turbulent at times. Can be helpful, but I think it's worth to go even kind of deeper than that, because then you can start looking for the reasons for this commitments, right? You can go even layer deeper than this. So it's not just this maybe kind of subconscious commitments that you're having to be comfortable or to avoid anxiety, but then you can start going even deeper, and that's where the even deeper transformation can happen, in my opinion at least, because then you're working with this even more unconscious levels of your being, and then you really start understanding the deeper workings of your mind and on your whole organism. So in my opinion, this is the real change, because then you don't have to worry as much about the surface level of behaviors or habits that you are having, because naturally, as you change these deeper levels, as your understanding change, as your kind of perspective on yourself and life in general starts changing, the behavioral change will, in my opinion at least, will happen more naturally, without as much conscious willpower as in a case of forcing that change, forcing new habits in your life. So you need to get to this level of where you understand these commitments, the underlying commitments currently that are happening in your life that prevent change, and broaden the perspective. Maybe poke holes a little bit in the logic of this commitment. Maybe see that perspective is not very valid. Maybe it's not very rational. Maybe there's something more. And this is not just a logical or rational or cognitive kind of work, but most importantly, it's also work with feelings, with emotions. Because if you tell yourself that, I don't feel anything, or it doesn't matter if I feel anxiety, I can just go through anything, you're not moving your whole organism, you're moving just your mind. So essentially it just becomes like a mental trip. So you need to cooperate with the whole workings of your organism. So the feelings, the intuitions, the irrational within you, maybe the dreams, even if you feel like going that direction. So working on that level of change, where you start understanding your underlying commitments, where you're honest with yourself and you see maybe this deeper reasons for your behaviors that you maybe kind of chose in the past. Maybe you put an effort for it to be in your life, and it made sense at that time. All that understanding and exploration, naturally, I hope, at least that's been my experience and experience for some of my clients, will provide this vehicle for creativity, for greater creativity. And what I mean by creativity is not just maybe, writing a book or painting, but the creativity in terms of ideas and understanding. So the more you explore, the more you give yourself the space to understand, to see broader picture, to understand these underlying commitments, the more your mind is going to start looking for maybe replacement of things. Because let's say you have an unconscious mechanism so that you don't experience anxiety, but then you realize, okay, this is happening, so I don't exercise, so I don't experience anxiety. Probably this mechanism will most likely stop working after a while, because you realize you're conscious of this mechanism, and so you start controlling it. So naturally, your mind will start coming up with alternative options. So how else can you cope with anxiety? What else can you do with stress or uncertainty, or all this maybe tension or feelings or ambivalence that you might be experiencing? So openness to that creativity, I think, can be very helpful, because that's where you start broadening your perspective. That's where you can add in your goals. So if your goal was to exercise more, or to go on a diet, or to go on walks every day, whatever that is, or to start being more open towards other people, or be nicer, whatever that might be. Once you start kind of introduce this goal on this deeper level, when you're working with this anxiety maybe mechanisms, or with this underlying commitments that you are having, your mind is going to start naturally producing opportunities for different ideas. So if that commitment doesn't work, then what sort of things can I do for it to make it work? And then maybe you realize that maybe your goal was to exercise every day, but then you found a compromise, which is exercise 3 times a day, which is equally as good. So being satisfied with what you have, what you are able to do, that's a big part of this change process too. When you recognize that you are actually in the process of change, so things are not static, that maybe you are aiming for, 80% of change, but you changed only 10%. That's a huge progress already. And acknowledging that progress, noticing, validating that progress and movement forward is extremely important, because then you will start noticing how you're negotiating with yourself. So on the one side, maybe you still have this old commitment about maybe being comfortable or not experiencing stress. But on the other side, you start seeing that, okay, these other commitments are also working for me. So all this, I think all of this that I might be saying might seem a little maybe nebulous or irrational or very irrational, essentially. But that represents, in my opinion, this work with the unconscious and giving yourself space to experience these deeper levels of the experience or who you are as a person. So you start having deeper understanding of how you're functioning. And this attitude is based on giving yourself space so that maybe these images from the unconscious can emerge, or different feelings. And by giving yourself space, I mean by not jumping to conclusions, not forcing things, but maybe setting times for daydreaming, for example, or for some kind of art, if that's what you want to do, or simply, mind wandering as well, where you start getting maybe different ideas. But essentially, change is, from this perspective, is not forced. You need to want to change for the change to work. You can't just wish yourself to change. You need to really want, and I mean really as in you need to feel that this is the right direction that you want to go. Because if you don't have that experience, if you don't really feel like this is what you want to do, you're going to be forcing yourself, and most likely will set yourself on a path of failure, because eventually you're going to burn out, because willpower essentially gets depleted. It's a limited resource. Even if we do improve our willpower over time, we can't just keep pushing every day. And we can't push every day because we are not just our conscious minds, we are not just our conscious egos, but we are this whole organism that, has their own things to do, I guess, in the background. So working with unconscious essentially is about this art of not doing. So giving yourself space, allowing these different ideas come to your mind, exploring without forcing things. So if you do experience a little bit of anxiety about something, it's okay to stay with that anxiety and sit with it and notice how it influences your life. Like how it influences your habits maybe, or the way you are, or the way you interact with people. So staying with different feelings, staying with different experiences without forcing things straight away, without trying to get an answer straight away, is extremely helpful in working with the unconscious, because the unconscious itself is not, and I think this is actually quite an important point, the unconscious itself is not just this kind of static thing or an organism that is just there, but it's actually in this constant process of change, of creativity, of generating ideas and thoughts and feelings. So it's this constant process, constant movement forward. It's not a static thing, but it's very dynamic. So when we sit with ourselves, when we sit with quote unquote the unconscious, we allow all these different ideas and thoughts to come to ourselves. So when we start exploring the underlying commitments that prevent change, automatically it's not just the process of exploration and understanding ourselves, But at the same time, it's also a creative process of trying to find alternative options, alternative commitments that will not be so much in conflict with what we've been doing so far. But then it becomes kind of process of negotiation. So it's not completely as passive process as you might imagine, because obviously you're creating the conditions, you're allowing yourself to sit with yourself, for example, or to be creative, or to welcome new ideas. But it is not forceful. It's not based on this idea of willpower and forcing things to be in a certain way in your life. So, in summary, change is difficult because we are working usually on this very superficial level of, okay, I'm going to do this, then this, then this. But then nothing is really changing, because to make this kind of changes, we are using just our willpower, which is nothing in comparison to who we are on this more holistic level. So the reason we might not be changing, the reason why we are stuck with our habits and why things are the way they are for a long time, is because we have this competing, hidden and unconscious commitment. So to produce a long-lasting change, we need to understand this unconscious commitments. We need to understand why we are doing the things we are doing, basically. What are we getting from maintaining the bad habits or certain behavior or certain attitudes? And this process, I do recommend, maybe if it's difficult, if it's too uncomfortable for yourself, or maybe if you're struggling to find out, I do recommend working with someone. You could work with a friend, you could work maybe in a group of friends, you could work with a therapist or a coach, or with me, for example, because other people can tell you things that you are not fully conscious of. Or at least they can offer a perspective that you haven't considered before. So then exploring these commitments, exploring the assumptions that you are having, that if you don't exercise, you're going to feel comfortable, for example, which is a valid, and actually there's a logical commitment, logical conclusion. But just exploring all that is going to start generating the real goals, the big goals that you can have in your life. And that's how you grow, that's how you start transforming yourself and your life. So you don't focus just on maybe having new morning routine or a new, different types of friends, or becoming more open socially. You don't focus on this superficial level, you focus on this deeper level. Then it becomes something like, I want to be more committed to my own health. I want to feel maybe good. Maybe I recognize that I feel good after exercise. So I want to get more committed to that. Thank you so much, Alpha Dog. So once again, exploring these deeper commitments, exploring the true reasons for why you're doing the things that you're doing, is going to help you generate these bigger goals, bigger questions, the real questions that need, or the real goals that need changing. And naturally, as you get committed to these bigger things, let's say maybe you start changing your assumption, that you recognize, whoa, actually, like, not exercising actually doesn't make me feel that good. For example, very simple, superficial example. But just that recognition can generate these new commitments, new assumptions, new meaning, new understanding of yourself and how things are in your life. So the more you do it in different areas in your life, what happens is that you start cooperating with your whole organism. You're not just forcing things and depleting all your energy that could be spent elsewhere on the more creative tasks, but you are working with this whole structure and basically with more flow, and you have more energy for other things in your life. Okay, so a question from first name, last name. What is your suggested method to identify a bad habit from a habit that is simply uncomfortable or one that requires growing pains? Well, that depends. I would imagine from one perspective, that's going to depend on what is it that you want. Because what is the thing that you want will determine how you are judging a particular habit. And I mean like really, really, what is it that you want? Not on the superficial level or maybe kind of social level when you think like, yeah, it would be nice to exercise more. So not exercising is a bad habit. But on this deeper level, like, what is it that you want? So that would be one perspective. But if you want kind of maybe more quote unquote objective perspective, then a bad habit would be something that maybe, and then again, the judgment will depend on your own value system. But from my perspective, a bad habit is something that doesn't promote well-being for your whole organism, doesn't make you feel good, doesn't promote maybe, good outcomes, good consequences in your life. So anything that is bad will be very subjective and then will depend on things like what is it that you want or your value system. So what is it that you value? So anything that is not in accordance to these values could be termed as bad. But again, it's subjective. Okay, guys, so are there any more questions about what I've been talking about today? Any more questions about change? Any more questions about working with the unconscious? So allowing the space and allowing maybe images come to your mind or ideas, exploring, entertaining different ideas, staying in this place of uncertainty without pushing for a solution straight away. I know there's probably a delay, so. But that's the thing, like, from my perspective, like, I can spend a lot of willpower on developing a habit, making the decision, changing something in myself. But it never works out well for me. Because first of all, I'm going to spend a lot of energy. And second of all, very often what happens after all is that I start feeling conflicted. So for me, the strategy I've been adopting in my life is to start looking for the ways to get into this state of flow where things are flowing, where I don't have to spend as much effort to push myself into a specific direction, but it happens more naturally. So then the energy and the effort I spend somewhere else. I spend on maybe creativity or understanding myself better or trying to notice patterns that happen in my life over a long period. So I redirect all this energy that I have, all that willpower, into things that will help me to change, help me to move forward, help me to maybe be more creative, more efficient in my life. But that wouldn't be possible if I didn't stop pushing myself so hard to, and trying to get all these habits. All right, guys, so I don't see there are any more questions. It's been very nice connecting with all of you again. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to join my newsletter, my mailing list, and you can find the link in the description just underneath the video. So in the meantime, if you do have any more questions, if you want to engage in more discussions, for example, which you can find out more about through the newsletter. But if you do have any more questions, you're invited to leave a comment below, just after the live stream is finished. All right, guys. So thank you so much for joining once again, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care.